Welcome back to the Wellness with Delaney podcast. Today, I have such a treat for you. I am here with Dr. Anthony Chaffee. He is such an impactful person in the medical space, in the health and wellness space, and we are going to talk about the optimal diet for so many different concerns in your health. This episode might blow your mind a little bit. It might shift some paradigms for you. So, my advice to everyone listening is listen with an open mind and just hear him out. Let's have this conversation, and you never know, you might be leaving with a whole new perspective on what the food industry is all about. So, Dr. Anthony, thank you so much for joining. Would you mind just introducing yourself, introducing your practice with the audience?
Yeah, well, thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure. And my name is Dr. Anthony Chaffee. I'm a medical doctor. I'm from America, but I currently live in Australia. I've been practicing there for about 6 years. I was specializing in neurosurgery, but I've sort of diverged out prior to finishing my residency to sort of a metabolic health practice that I'm currently running. So I'm a medical director at my own medical practice where I focus on optimizing health, reversing metabolic issues, chronic diseases, and addressing root cause issues to medicine instead of just papering over issues with medications and pills, as we've been taught and trained in medical school to just sort of push pills. I'm actually able to address root cause and actually reverse things like diabetes, autoimmunity, high blood pressure, and many, many other things. So that's what I'm currently doing now.
Wow, that's incredible. And like you said, I think so many doctors are just prescribing pills. And I have been to very few appointments other than maybe my naturopath where the topic of like diet and lifestyle even ever come up. I think it's always, immediately some sort of pill, but never those deeper questions. So with that, I know that one thing that you focus a lot on is nutrition. So what would you say is the best diet for optimal health?
Well, I think nutrition is actually made a lot more complicated than it needs to be. If you look in the wild, animals know what to eat intuitively. A koala is a pretty dumb animal, and yet they know exactly what to eat, how much to eat, when to stop eating. And so, if a koala can figure out what to eat without a PhD in nutrition, I think we can as well. You look at what people are biologically optimized for. There's is an immutable law of biology, which is that of adaptation. What a species has been you know you know, eating for the longest, they're going to be the most adapted to. So humans have been apex predators for over 2 million years. We know that humans have been living and thriving in the ice ages in the Arctic Circle for eons. And so there's nothing really else to eat in the Arctic Circle now, let alone in an ice age, besides other animals. It might be marine animals that would dive in, or they might be fishing, have seals and whales going in eating the fish or the other marine life, and then you get access to those as well, and then pull those up onto land. So humans have been apex predators for millions of years. We know we've been thriving. We have current civilizations right now, like the Maasai, the Inuit, the Australian Aboriginals, formerly the Native Americans, who 100 years ago, 150 years ago, were largely eating meat. And they didn't have any of these Western diseases, now called chronic diseases, that we have now. But now that they've transitioned over to a Western post-agricultural diet, they get all the same diseases, and in fact, they get more of them because of that rule of adaptation. Europeans and others have had more time to adapt to agricultural crops, but only about 10,000 years. But these other native populations have only about 100 years. That's not enough to do anything. And so they get the same chronic diseases that we get only when eating what we eat, but at a far higher rate because they don't have that adaptation. So when you sort of break it down like that, then it makes it pretty clear. We should eat what we're biologically designed to eat. And I think that all the best evidence points to that being a high fat, meat based, or even full carnivore diet.
Wow. Okay. So, and this shocks a lot of people. I know that a lot of people think like more veggies are better, more plants are better, more whole grains are better. And so they might hear this and be like, what? The system's been telling me to eat less fat and less red meat. So, how did you even discover that this was optimal for you and for your patients?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you think about it, we've been getting these dietary recommendations for the last 50 years, and what has happened in those 50 years? We become the fattest and sickest that we've ever been in human history. And people say, well, only 9% of people follow the nutritional guidelines. Like, well, thank God for that, because only 9% of people in America are diabetic too. If it was much higher, it'd probably be higher than that. The thing is that the trend moved in that direction. When we were told that saturated fat and meat were bad for us, people started reducing it. Red meat reduced by 33%, saturated fat, cholesterol consumption reduced up by about the same. Fruits and vegetables increased by 30 and 40% respectively. Grains increased much larger proportion than that. Sugar, sweeteners, high fructose corn syrup increased by over a factor of 3, is about 3.5 since the 1970s, since those recommendations, because everything tasted like garbage. You remove the fat and the meat from everything, it doesn't taste good anymore. So they have to add a ton of sugar to it to make it palatable. And they did. And then they replaced saturated fat with so-called heart healthy polyunsaturated fats, the seed oils, vegetables, oils, etc., and increased our consumption of that by calories by, again, about 3.5 times. And so, again, we have followed that trend. We've moved in the direction they wanted to, and our health has dramatically suffered as a result of that. And you can look at that every single metric, every single way you want to look at that. You can see that this has gotten a lot worse for basically every single chronic disease. I first came to this on accident because I had a professor of biology actually here at University of Washington who was a professor of cancer biology. I'd already taken botany, biology, organic chemistry, genetics, all these sorts of things. So I had the background. And then he was talking about how plants use defensive chemicals to protect themselves. And I knew that from taking botany, and people know this intuitively. If you get lost in the woods and you run out of food, you can't just eat any random plant. You have to be very careful because they can be very toxic or poisonous or even kill you. And that's because they're poisonous and they make poisons, and that's just how plants defend themselves. And so, every living thing has a natural defense, some way to defend itself. And so, we don't have to spray the forests and the prairies and things like that with pesticides to stop the insects from wiping them out. They have their own pesticides. And my professor of cancer biology was just explaining this to us and saying that these toxins can be actually quite potent and carcinogenic. And even the WHO recognizes this. WHO and they're no fan of the carnivore diet or meat in general, but they have a whole website dedicated towards the natural toxins found in food. And they're all different plant toxins, mushroom toxins, and algae. There isn't a single toxin that they mention that is derived from meat, not a single one. And if they're saying that meat's so bad, they should be able to find at least one toxin. There's not a single one mentioned on this entire page. And so, and the WHO even says that some of these can be mutagenic or carcinogenic and cause serious harm, illness, and even death in both livestock and humans. And these are in the natural toxins in the food we eat, not just random things out there. And so my professor was the first one to tell me this, and he was talking about cancer in particular. And so he was talking about all the different carcinogens that were found in the vegetables and fruits that we eat. So Brussels sprouts, he said, had 136 known carcinogens. Mushrooms had over 100, but spinach, kale, lettuce, celery, cucumber, broccoli, you name it, all the different fruits and vegetables that you would find in the produce aisle, that they had 60, 80, or over 100 known carcinogens. And they were quite abundant. We know from the work of Professor Bruce Ames from Berkeley that the plants make natural toxins and pesticides. At the time, they were trying to ban all these pesticides, which is not necessarily a bad idea, but we've sort of gone the other way. And it was partially to do with Professor Ames's work, because he showed that the naturally occurring pesticides and insecticides that the plants make outweighed the pesticides we sprayed on them with industrial processes by a factor of 10,000. So 99.99% of the toxins and insecticides and pesticides that were found in the plant were actually naturally occurring in the plant. We didn't spray on it. And that things like mushrooms were hundreds of times more carcinogenic than the pesticides that we sprayed on them at the time. I was looking at the ones at the time, it's the late 80s. So this is before glyphosate and things like that. I don't know how that would stack up now. But at the time, he showed this, that the plants themselves were far more toxic and far more carcinogenic than the pesticides we were using. And so his conclusion was, well, obviously the pesticides aren't that big of a deal because everybody knows that fruits and vegetables are so good for you. Well, that's assuming a fact that's not in evidence. The data actually showed that the plants were hundreds of times more carcinogenic and had 10,000 times more known toxins. So that's what the hard data showed. His editorialization and opinion was that pesticides are safe. The chemicals that we spray in order to kill life trying to eat a plant is safe because it's less toxic than the plant we're spraying it on. What that tells me is you should run far away from any of these plants because they're freaking toxic. And my professor of cancer biology, he definitely came to that conclusion as well. We were very taken aback by this. We were very blown away, and and I remember thinking in my head, I was like, but aren't vegetables still good for you? And he just looked at us and he said, I don't eat salad. I don't eat vegetables. I don't let my kids eat vegetables. Plants are trying to kill you. I was like, yep, no more plants. And I just defaulted into just eating eggs and meat because what else was there to eat? My only qualification was, does it have a plant? Yes, not going to eat it, or no, and then I would eat it. And so I never felt better in my entire life. For about 5 years, and then I sort of slipped off of it because I started convincing myself of all the rhetoric and stuff like that coming in. Oh, dose makes the poison. Maybe it's not that bad, and well, they have these other good things. I'm like, yeah, but they have bad things too. And it was something I wrestled with for a while, but little by little things slipped back in. And I never ate a processed food diet. I always ate a whole food diet. My family, we cooked every single meal, except like breakfast cereal or something like that. Every other meal was cooked. And so I, grew up and as an adult ate like that as well. So it was a very clean, omnivorous diet with a lot of meat. But I never felt great after that. And even though I was an All-American, I was playing professional rugby, I felt I was performing better than a lot of other people. I never felt as good as I did during that 5-year period in my early 20s. I've chalked it up to age. I'm just getting older. Everyone knows when you hit 25, you just start to die. And so that's what I thought in my head. And then it wasn't until many years later, I was in my late 30s. I was just turned 38. I was back from doing humanitarian work in Bangladesh. And I came across information that said, no, actually, humans are carnivores. That's just the kind of animal we are. And I mean, I learned that in second grade that humans were apex predators, and it doesn't click in. Lions are apex predators. So does that mean that quinoa would actually be better for them? No, of course not. They need meat. They have certain biological adaptations that require meat, and then again, because plants have toxins, they can cause harm and to varying degrees. They may even have just anti-nutrients that block out the absorption of different nutrients. So when I sort of came to that realization that that's actually our biological design and we're eating outside of our biological design, I sort of looked at it under the lens of now a physician, and everything just started dropping into place. It's like all these chronic diseases that native populations don't get. I mean, the 1800s, 1700s, 1800s used to call these chronic diseases Western diseases because these non-Western populations that were still largely hunter-gatherer, really hunter, they didn't get them. Anthropologists talk about that now, about how the issues that native populations that are living more to our biological design, that the problems that they get are childbirth issues, accidents, injuries, getting eaten by things, and infections, right? And they actually live. This is very clear in the anthropological record that if you take out um, infant mortality, because obviously you're going to have a higher infant mortality rate when you're having kids in the jungle and there are pythons and lions around, right? So there's going to be a higher infant mortality rate. That when you actually see how long people live when they die of old age, that's very different because they're actually quite healthy. So people were living as long or longer than people in developed nations with modern medicine and all that sort of stuff, and they get none of the chronic diseases unless they move to a post-agricultural Western diet, start moving to the cities or start importing those foods as they have in some places. Then they start getting what are called diseases of civilization. Like we have this all in front of us. It's just sitting there right there. And they go back to eating their original way, those diseases go away. So there's a cause and effect relationship here that a lot of people are missing, but it's in the literature right now. You can just look at it. And so when I came to that realization, and looked at animals, though, why are we the only sick animals? Why aren't other animals getting lupus and cancer and heart disease and things like that? It turns out that, well, some of them do if they're in captivity and being fed the wrong thing, or there's signs of the zoo say, don't feed the animal, it makes them very sick. Okay, what do they get sick with? They get all those diseases. I've even seen signs at parks that say, don't feed the ducks bread, it gives them diabetes. Okay, what the hell is it doing to you?
Yeah.
Right? Like it's it is pretty clear. We worry about fatty liver disease. We say, oh, well, we don't know. It must be from eating fat because you eat fat and you get fat. Well, fat doesn't actually go through the liver. It's the one macronutrient that doesn't go through the liver. It goes in through the lymphatics and goes directly into your circulatory system. But carbs do. And how do we create fatty liver in ducks and geese to make foie gras, which literally means fatty liver? We stick a tube down their throat and force feed them grains, right? And so that's how you make it, and that's why it's considered an inhumane practice, and people sort of, say, "Well, maybe don't get foie gras because it's not really nice," and it's not. But that's how you do it, right? They're not feeding them a bunch of suet and fat and butter and things like that, or meat. They're feeding them grains, and now we're just shoveling in grains and processed food and all that sort of garbage. And now kids under the age of 10 are getting fatty liver disease when it used to only be like middle-aged alcoholics and things like that. Now it's like because there's sugar in everything, there's carbs in everything, and that's the mainstay of our diet. So, long story short, when I sort of came to that realization, I really started digging into the literature, and I just tried to learn as much as I could on the subject to see what we knew, what we understood, and you know, is this idea something that would hold water? And the more I looked, the more I found evidence to support this, and I didn't want to be a victim of confirmation bias. I didn't want to just look at things that support it. So I asked questions. Okay, well, if this, we should see evidence that could go one way or the other. And it kept supporting my thesis. And I said, okay, well, what about all these vegan proponents and plant-based doctors and nutritionists? Okay, what do they know that I don't? Let's go see what they say. It was all very, very unimpressive. There were things that were predicated on known lies, that things like cholesterol and saturated fat cause heart disease. We know for a cold frozen fact that they don't. And we even have large scale randomized controlled trials, double blinded placebo trials showing that they don't. And those were buried for 40 years because they didn't like the results. And so they wanted to keep pushing the cholesterol hypothesis, but those have come out subsequently. It's a Minnesota coronary experiment, if people want to look that up, and many others actually. And and then just abject lies. Like now they're just trying to say, no, actually humans are herbivores because we don't have big fangs. Okay, gorillas, I guess, must be carnivores because they do have big fangs. And yet, no, they're herbivores. So, denying just frank truths and trying to say that the Native Americans we know did buffalo drops. It's in their heritage. It's in their mythology. They talk about it, about how they did this. It's clearly we wiped out the bison in America. The U.S. Army did in the 1800s in order to cut off their food supply. They're a bunch of herbivores just grazing on grass. I wouldn't have done anything to them. What really? And so now they're just it's just abject lies and half truths and lies of omission, and then things they just got completely wrong. And so I was like, yeah, I think there's something to this. And then when I started applying it to myself and my family and then my patients, I started seeing reversals of disease that are right now considered irreversible, but we're now publishing more data on actual reversals of things like multiple sclerosis, where people have had complete reversal of their symptoms. And even on MRI, their lesions are shrinking. And that's something that, as far as I know, has never been reported in the literature.
Wow, that is incredible, and I can't wait to dig into some of that the chronic illness side of things, and I'm so glad you just debunked veganism within, like, just that little clip. I was one of those people. I was a vegan for 5 years, and I was the person who was promoting all the documentaries. I, like, promoted vegan content on social media. Like, I was so on this moral superiority, like, pedestal that I'd put myself on, and it took such an ego check for me to realize I was wrong when my thyroid stopped working, my hormones weren't functioning, and I was like, why am I so sick? And then that's really what kind of led me into this pathway. And so it's so real. Like veganism is not the way if you want to feel like an optimally functioning human being. Okay, so carnivore, I see a lot of different definitions of carnivore. Some people who just have meat, some people who eat like raw dairy and eggs, some people who eat like anything animal based, even if it's pasteurized. Like, what is the definition of carnivore as you see it?
Yeah, I think that really, if you just want to get down to brass tacks, it's just eating fatty meat and drinking water. I mean, that's the basics. What would we be eating in nature if we were hunting? That's sort of what you should eat. You can eat nose to tail, but they didn't always. You look at Native Americans, they would actually go for the fattiest cuts. It was actually interesting. I remember from my childhood, Native Americans, they hunted deer or something like that. They'd skin it, they'd dress it, they take out the organs. Maybe they'd keep a couple choice organs, but a lot of it they would leave. And because it's just a lot of stuff to pack back. If you're out there on your own, you've got to carry 300 pounds of meat back. Like, you're just going to pick the choice bits. And they would leave the haunches, the hindquarters. Those are the leanest. But it was explained to me at the time that they left this as like an offering to the spirits, and thanking them for this kill so they could feed their family. But it happened to be that that was the leanest part, and so they took all the fattiest bits, which are more the forequarters and the abdominal structures and that sort of thing. And so to me, I think that that's probably the best way to do it. Now we have more access to things. People have dairy. We've been having dairy for about 10, 12,000 years, about the same time we've been sort of eating more plants. You can see that in the genetics as well. People, this again to debunk the sort of vegan side of things, say, well, even the omnivore theory. Well, if we are carnivores, then why do we make amylase, which breaks down starches, right? So like plant starches. And oh, we must have been eating roots and tubers and maybe just eating some meat, maybe sometimes. Well, you can't do that in the Arctic Circle during an ice age, and we know that humans have been there. But in the genetics, we've actually shown this, that we have only had amylase, been only making amylase and the ability to break down starch for, again, about 10,000 years with the advent of agriculture. And so, no, we haven't been eating starchy foods and plants in large quantities before that. We weren't capable of getting benefit from that to that degree. Milk about the same. So lactose persistence, or lactase persistence, is about 10 to 15,000 years old. So I think that there are a lot of great nutrients in those sorts of things. I think there's amazing nutrients in milk, especially raw milk and raw dairy, those sorts of things. But when you look at mammals, they drink their mother's milk until they're weaned, and they're weaned onto their mother's diet, and then they eat that for the rest of their lives, and they wean their children onto that. So I think that's probably the best way to do it. If you don't have access and like milk's the best you got, great. There's a lot of great nutrients in there. It does have certain things that are specifically geared towards babies, though, such as casomorphines, which trigger the animal and give it chemical signals to eat more, eat more, eat more, and to put on weight and pack on weight. And so, especially if somebody's trying to lose weight, dairy can be a difficulty with that. They can sort of stall their weight loss. Carbohydrates, babies it's much easier for them to get into ketosis, even when drinking milk with lactose in it, because they have to be in ketosis, because that's how their brain grows. Since agriculture, our immediately after agriculture, our brains have actually shrunk. And so that's not genetic, that's developmental, because it was immediate. It wasn't a slow, gradual decline. And in fact, our brain size was going up, up, up exponentially. And then about 10, 15,000 years ago, it was bang, straight down. But only in those areas that adopted agriculture. The rest of the world that did not have agriculture still remained these big brained, tall individuals. But with agriculture, brains shrank by 11% for men and 17% for women. And we saw this in real time with the Native Americans and Native Australians. Their height and their cranial capacity shrank in the last 100 years, 150 years. So we see this in real time. A guy named Dr. Weston A. Price actually showed this in real time as it was transitioning, sort of back in the 1920s. He was saying, like, oh, look at this. This is the same family. We're seeing these disparities. And he could reverse it by giving people more animal-based nutrition. He actually used a lot of raw milk because it is very nutritious. But if you have access to meat, I don't think you need it. I don't think there's anything there that you're missing from meat.
Mm,
So that's sort of my take on it. I think some people hear a carnivore diet and they think, oh, okay, I'll just eat more meat. But the really important part about the carnivore diet is excluding all the other things, because those, meat is great. It gives you all your nutrition and it's really good for you. But other things can cause harm. Plants do defend themselves chemically. They have anti-nutrients. They have direct toxins. You talked about your thyroid. There's an entire category of plant toxins called goitrogens, meaning they cause goiters, which is an enlarged dysfunctional thyroid. So there are a lot of the kale is replete with them. In fact, they used to give kale to livestock. I had to stop because they gave it to sheep, and their babies were being born with birth defects, massive goiters like the size of a baseball, and they were being born dead. They were stillborn, and so they had to stop that. That wasn't working. So they gave it to dairy cows, and so the dairy cows were using it because you needed a lot of feed to for a dairy cow to produce so much milk. 'Cause they're producing a lot of milk, sometimes 100+ gallons of milk a day, which is pretty impressive. And so they need a lot of nutrition. They need a lot of energy. And so they're giving them a lot of kale. And the milk from those dairy cows were giving the people who drank it goiters, right? Those toxins went through into the milk and were clogging up people's thyroids. So there are all sorts of different. I mean, massive. Um, uh, there are numerous categories, large categories of toxins with multiple, if not thousands, of examples of each individual one in those categories. WHO again lists out a lot of those. Um, so you want to avoid these things. You want to avoid things that cause harm, and you want to just eat things that are just good for you if you want to be as healthy as you can. So I think it's as important what not to eat as what to eat. So some people just eat a lot more meat, and that's great, but then they won't exclude all the other things. So for me to do it best, and what I think gives the best results for myself and my patients is no plants or mushrooms, no sugar or any sweeteners, and nothing artificial. And that will go for sauces, seasonings, and drinks as well. And if you sort of use that as a litmus test, you sort of say, okay, well, what about coffee? Well, coffee is a plant. Okay, a lot of people have difficult time giving up coffee as well as everything else. They're like, listen, you do everything except coffee. It's like, okay, well, baby steps. Maybe just think about it down the road. But what about stevia? Well, that's natural. Okay, well, it's a plant and it's a sweetener, so you don't want to do it. And animal models in mice have actually shown that one equivalent of 1 can of soda sweetened with stevia to a mouse, small can, that reduced fertility rate by over 55%. Okay, so you don't actually necessarily want that. Okay, what does that do to us? Is that going to screw up our hormones as well? Because again, all the plants have toxins, and a lot of them are hormonal disruptors as well. And that's a big thing right now because we're the least fertile we've ever been. We have the lowest testosterone rates in human history. We have the lowest fertility fertility rates in both men and women in human history. PCOS is at the highest it's ever been. That's the leading cause of infertility in women, and that's largely caused by plants, both carbohydrates because it raises insulin. Insulin blocks the production of estrogen and increases testosterone because testosterone converts into estrogen in the ovaries for women, and so insulin blocks that conversion. So you get too much testosterone, not enough estrogen, you get PCOS, and that's a major cause of PCOS. And there's more than that. So there are a lot of sort of hormonal disruptors as well. So you want to avoid these things. And so if you sort of use that as a litmus test and you just sort of think, okay, what would I do as a hunter? Just sort of kill an animal and eat it, and that's basically it.
easy. Okay, what about honey? Because that's animal based, but it's also sugar.
So it's sugar, so you don't
Okay.
need it. Yeah,
Okay. I know a lot of
yeah.
people who are like carnivore eat a lot
Mhm.
of honey. So I've always been like, I'm not actually sure. I feel like I see so many
Mm.
different philosophies. So that's really, really good to know. And okay, on the dairy, is this why like cheese is the only food I feel like there's nothing in me that ever wants to stop eating it? Like
Yeah,
I never feel like I've had enough
mm,
cheese. So I'm like, and it's raw
yeah,
dairy, like, okay, so that makes me sad,
yeah.
but
Yeah.
that
Well,
makes
but
me
yeah, those are the casomorphines, right? And
yeah.
so that's telling that baby animal to keep eating and keep eating and keep eating so that it can
Yep.
grow because babies are vulnerable. Sadly, the majority of things that are eaten in the wild are babies, right?
Yeah.
Because they're the ones that are vulnerable. And so if some, predators get out like, ooh, babies, they just bang, they go for them because it's an easy meal.
Mhm.
And so you need to tell them to grow, 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 grow. Like the runt of a litter in pigs. Like pigs will typically have one or two less nipples than they'll have babies, and that's because they need to fight for that food and get bigger and bigger and bigger, and so the runt gets weaned out, and so only the strongest survive, right?
Mm.
And so that's a bit of a natural selection, even from birth and within that own family. So it's telling them you need to eat, you need to eat, you need, so you can grow big and strong, and so they don't get devoured. And so when we eat this stuff as adults, it gives the same sort of inappropriate response. Well, now it's an inappropriate response because we're adults. I mean, if you wanted to use some cheese every now and then, I would just suggest using it infrequently and as a condiment. You have like a cheesy omelet, or you put a
Mhm.
melted slice of cheese on a burger patty or something like that. Fine. You want to put some sour cream mixed in with some ground beef, those sorts of things. Um, as long as you can do that in moderation. Some people hear that and just go like, "Oh, I can eat cheese," and like will literally eat blocks of cheese. And like you say, you don't have a natural inclination to stop when you're eating a lot of dairy or cheese.
No.
So, go back to the koala example. Why does a koala knows when to stop eating? Because there are natural impulses that tell it when to start, when to stop. If you eat your actual biologically appropriate evolved diet, you should get those same impulses. So if you're just eating meat, there will be a point that even if it tastes amazing at first, it's your favorite steak, it's amazing, first bite is incredible. The further you go, the less good it will taste because your body actually tracks nutrients, it doesn't track calories. And so your stomach actually has receptors that track up your vagus nerve up into your brain and tell your brain how much nutrients you have in your stomach. This is why the whole thing, oh, eat a lot of fiber even though there aren't nutrients, never work. People are just starving all the time and feeling bloated and sick, even though they were stuffed, they couldn't eat anymore, because it wasn't fooling your body. It's not fooling millions of years of biology, and so it will track those nutrients. And when you get more and more of those nutrients, when people talk about protein and fat are very satiating. Well, yeah, because your body wants them. And so it wants a certain amount of them. It wants those nutrients that come along with them. And so when you get them, your brain says, hey, we have enough now. And so it dampens down that taste response that you get. So it actually tastes less good. And eventually you'll get to the point that it just tastes like cardboard. And that's the point you want to get to. And if you keep eating past that, it will actually taste bad. So it's really difficult to overeat on a carnivore diet because you would actually have to force feed yourself and you wouldn't actually
Mm.
want to do that. But with cheese, you can just keep going, and so that should tell you something. It's probably not meant for us as adults.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is blowing my mind. Okay, do you like
Mhm.
salt your meat or just completely cook it as is?
I think it's fine for people to use salt. I think salt has been sort of vilified a bit harshly.
Mhm.
Some people are a bit sensitive to salt and they can get a bit of a blood pressure raise. Most people don't though, and so I think it's fine, especially when you're converting onto a carnivore diet or any ketogenic diet. I mean, the carnivore diet is a ketogenic diet, and this is great thing about it is because there are literally thousands of high level randomized controlled trials with thousands of patients, and some of them looking at ketogenic diets. They find that ketogenic diets are extremely beneficial for specific health outcomes as a medical intervention, and carnivore diet is a ketogenic diet. So I think that's a key part of that. Going back to the honey thing, I think that's important to actually be in ketosis. I think that's, and I've done a lot of videos talking about, is ketosis harmful and the benefits of ketogenic carnivore athletes and looking at the science and the biochemistry of this, because it's quite clear that this isn't from living experience and seeing this in hundreds, actually thousands of patients now, and looking at their blood work very closely. I can tell you that it actually gives a lot of benefit. But we have that sort of ketogenic nature of carnivore. I think gives a lot of benefit as well.
Okay, gotcha. So that's really good to know. Who benefits most from this, whether it's like in the chronic disease or like the optimizing arenas?
So, like, who benefits from having us be sick and things like that?
Or sorry, from carnivore diet. Like what are who are
Oh, I
going to
see.
see the most dramatic benefits from this?
Oh, well, everyone will see benefits, and a lot of people are coming to this because they might be quite unwell, they might
Mhm.
have weight issues, autoimmunity. That's a big one. This is a very good autoimmune diet because I think it cuts to the basis of the cause of autoimmunity. I did a video on this called the real cause of autoimmune disease, and it's a theory, but I but it's, it's a theory I came up with. I don't think that autoimmune diseases are actually autoimmune in nature. I don't think the body is actually, I know that the body is not actually capable of attacking itself, because that's clear in all the immunology textbooks. I took postgraduate immunology as an undergrad, before I went to medical school. And it was very clear the body cannot attack itself. When your immune cells are being matured in your thymus, they're tested against every single antigen, so every single molecule that your body makes. And if they react even weakly to any of them, they're killed. They're not allowed out in circulation. So the only immune cells that you have are, by definition, incapable of making an antibody that could stick to your body. So then they say, well, there's this molecular mimicry. You get a viral infection or some sort of insult, and your body makes antibodies towards that, and they just happen to randomly be something that could also weakly cross react, and then your body gets sensitized to your own body, and then you start attacking your body. But again, you're not capable of doing that, because if you were capable of making something that could attack a virus that could cross react with your own body, then you were capable of making an antibody that could attack your body in the first place, right? So that doesn't make any sense. And also, it doesn't act like an infection. We're saying that this is an autoimmune. Your body is just sensitized to your pancreas or to your thyroid or to your colon or something, because it thinks that's an infection. Well, how does your body attack infections? It ramps up the attack until that infection is gone or you die from the infection, right? It doesn't just take a break. It doesn't just slowly fight this infection over months and years and just back and forth and flare up and attack it and then just go, okay, I think I'm tired. I'm just going to go on vacation for a few days and then flare up again. But that's how autoimmunity works. Some people have like sort of persistent cases, but they're like, "Oh, that's really where that's a really aggressive form." Other times it's flares and it's ebb and flow of flares and remissions, and that's not how the immune system fights infections, because your immune system fights an infection until that infection is dead, or else you're dead, because that's the alternative. If an infection sort of goes crazy, like, you're going to die from that. And so that doesn't make sense. But we do know from things like celiac disease, celiac is considered an autoimmune condition, but a gluten mediated autoimmune condition. And that's the key, because you eat gluten. Gluten is a plant toxin. It's called a lectin, and it can damage your body. It can mimic other things and bind to different receptors and can stick onto your enterocytes, your intestinal cells, and damage them, cause leaky gut. Now, other things can get into your body, and that's important for things like autoimmunity. But because it's attacking your body's going to do exactly what it's supposed to do, which is attack that thing. And so you make antibodies towards that. But here's the important part, is that when you stop eating gluten and there's no gluten attacking and sticking to your cell, the problem goes away, right? Because it's only the gluten is stuck to your cell, and then the antibody attacks that. And because your cell is in the way, it gets hit in the crossfire as collateral damage. You're not going to napalm the force in Vietnam without getting some civilians. It's just not going to happen, right? And so that's part of that warfare process and trying to defend yourself and attack that gluten. So you get rid of the gluten, you stop eating the gluten. Now that's not attacked your enterocytes, and then there's no more damage, and you can actually see the repair of your gut, because the gut's a very fast healing structure. 4 to 6 weeks is completely healed, even though the antibodies for a celiac stay elevated for over 3 years after your last exposure to gluten. Okay, so that's not an autoimmune disease, because those antibodies are not attacking your body. They're attacking the gluten, which is stuck to your body. And that's why you're getting damaged. And then you take the gluten away and the problem goes away. And that's exactly what we see in other autoimmune conditions. So that's what I think is happening. I mean, I don't think we've identified, okay, what is it sticking to and what is it attacking? It just says, oh, okay, well, we just see these particular antibodies. But that's how that works. And so that's how it works in practice. When you go into a carnivore diet, you eliminate out everything else, like all these different plant toxins and lectins and glyphosates, and all these things are very strongly associated with autoimmunity. That you get rid of all of those things, and all of a sudden, even though the antibodies are elevated, the damage stops and goes away. And so people with Crohn's disease, all of a sudden their gut's healing, they're getting better, even though those antibodies are up. You have, I mentioned multiple sclerosis. We actually were putting together a case series of, a dozen or so people. We could do this with 50 people or more, a lot more. It's just, for a matter of time, we just sort of stuck to that number. who have completely reversed their multiple sclerosis, and their symptoms are completely better. Some of these people are bedridden in wheelchairs. Some of them are still recovering. They're still having neurological issues. Massive improvements either way. And on MRI, the lesions are shrinking. So this is stopping the damage and allowing the body to start to heal. And so that is very significant. So I think things like autoimmunity, it's really, really good for, because I think that it is addressing the underlying root cause of autoimmunity. Same with things like diabetes. Diabetes is a completely man-made sort of disease. I mean, again, we can give it to ducks by feeding them bread, and we give it to ourselves by eating something inappropriate also. And so we have large-scale human trials looking at ketogenic diet, so high-fat, meat-based, whole food, ketogenic diet, not even necessarily fully carnivorous, but mostly eating meat, getting the majority of your calories from meat, that this has been shown to reverse diabetes. And so that's been shown in clinical trials, and then people have put this into practice, and now we're having tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of people around the world doing this now. It's worked so well that it actually got put into the official government guidelines in Australia. The ketogenic diets, high-fat, meat-based ketogenic diets, should be used in the treatment of diabetes. And it was so successful and worked so well that it just this past year, it got upgraded to best practice. So it is now considered best practice in Australia to use a high-fat, meat-based ketogenic diet, like a carnivore diet, to treat diabetes. And this is something that whenever you sort of I guess piss people off and sort of doing something right. So you get the most flack when you're over the target. You get people attacking you. And so I have had people, and I know that there are doctors that have been attacked and have their medical licenses attacked specifically by uh, food and drug companies that have specifically said these ketogenic diets and these sorts of things are actually hurting our cereal sales, and we've got to attack them, we've got to discredit them, we've got to get their license taken away. Like Gary Fettke, they literally named him by name, some of these cereal companies, and they came after him. Well, I've had people try to do that as well. I've never had a patient or a colleague or anything like that put in a complaint about anything that I've done, but I've certainly had people online that's not even in Australia, like in other countries, saying that, oh, this guy's putting out dangerous information, or this guy's not a real doctor, or something like that. And so they complain to the licensing board that furnishes my license, says that I'm not a licensed doctor, and they're like, yeah, that one we can take care of, but
Yeah.
the thing is, like, with that, so I just point out, they're like, hey, are you're giving this information? I was like, yeah, this is a ketogenic diet. Ketogenic diets are in the national schedule for treating diabetes. This is best practice. I mean, this is not actually a fringe movement. This is now mainstream opinion. This is mainstream medicine, and it is actually. We just don't think of it that way, but it actually is.
Mhm.
And so, that wasn't a problem. And it was like, yep, fair enough. And so the medical board, agrees that this is actually, best practice for treating diabetes and these sorts of things. So, but even when you don't have any of these issues, it actually makes a lot of sense to do this. I mean, I didn't have any of these issues. I was playing high level rugby. I was an All American. I worked out all the time. I ate a very clean diet. Never ate processed food. And even I, like, just by dropping vegetables and eating more fatty meat, I didn't feel a little bit better. I didn't feel a lot better. I felt 1,000 times better than I've ever felt, except for those 5 years of my early 20s. And so that was a huge wake up call for me. And I talk to people and they say, well, I'm not sick. I don't have a problem. I still feel pretty good. So, maybe I don't need it. And I just point out to them, I'm like, you don't actually know how bad you feel until you stop feeling that way. And because we have just like a low line baseline level of garbage that we feel all the time because of all the things that we do to ourselves. Maybe that goes up and down and whatever, and depending on the day and what you're doing, but that becomes normal for us. And we just say, okay, well, that's just normal. And so we judge ourselves based on that normal. So, well, I feel pretty good compared to my normal. But if they get rid of this stuff and just eat the way your body's designed to eat, now you'll know what good feels like. And it is wildly different than what you've ever felt before. And then you look back and you realize, and I did this about 2 weeks into this at 38. I looked back, I looked at how good I was feeling and how good I was performing athletically as I went back and just started playing rugby again. I'm like, yep, I feel great. We're doing this. And I looked back on my entire life, except for those 5 years and right now, and I realized that I felt like crap my entire life. And I was pissed off because like this was my birthright. I should have felt amazing this whole time. I should have been another 6 inches taller and had a bigger brain and been much more athletic. Like that's what we're designed for. And yet we're being robbed from that. And not only are we being robbed from that, they're doubling down and saying we need to go even further and get rid of all of it. And it really harms people. And so we're seeing this massive uptick in chronic disease. I think that is directly caused from eating the wrong thing, among other things, but that's a major one. And so anyone can benefit from this. If you have any sort of these non-communicable chronic diseases, I think it's really important that you do this. You can see massive benefits. But even if you just feel great, you just want to optimize yourself. I mean, I've friends of mine that are professional athletes and people that have come to me to help out. They're top tier, going to the Olympics level athletes, and they're like, hey, I want to try this, and it just launches their performance and their health up to the next level. So everybody can benefit from eating an appropriate diet and not eating poison.
This is amazing. You know what's so funny about all of this and the way you have been attacked? I've seen, hearing today, but also on your Instagram, the way you've been attacked for sharing what you share. When I share about lectins and oxalates and phytates, I get attacked for not being a doctor. I'm a
Mhm.
health coach, but I'm not a doctor. But then when the
Mhm.
doctor shares it, like, you also get attacked, but you are the
Yeah.
doctor. Like, it's not that they don't, like, dislike the lack of credentials for me. Like, it's
Mhm.
they don't like when they don't like what you're saying, they're gonna attack you no matter what. If you are a doctor, they'll attack your license. If you're not a doctor, they're like, "Well, you're not a doctor." So
Yeah.
it's hilarious, but I think the proof is in the pudding when you see so many people reversing so many chronic illnesses. I mean, people are constantly told they'll never be able to reverse diabetes and they'll live with it and manage it forever. Like, right, you can manage it, but you can't heal it. So the idea of being able to actually reverse all signs of these chronic diseases is pretty mind-blowing. Okay, I have a few
Yeah.
like rapid fire questions that I know a lot of people are curious about when it comes to carnivore. Number 1 being, do you supplement or do you get everything you need from food?
Yeah, if you have to supplement, then by definition, your diet is deficient. The animals in the wild, they don't need supplements. And the vegans say this, they say, well, yeah, you can't get B12 from plants. Okay, well, therefore, plants can't give you everything you need, and therefore is a bad diet. But they're like, yeah, but we're giving injections, B12 injections to the cows anyway, so we're just skipping the middleman. Like, yeah, no, cows and eating grass don't need B12 shots, or else, I mean, all these animals that just need B12. It's just like good thing we have all these these altruistic forest rangers going out and just injecting B12 to every squirrel and cricket out there, because just nothing makes B12. It has to come from a shot. No, you don't need anything if you're eating your biologically appropriate diet, and that's how you know. Well, it's another piece of evidence as to this being our biologically appropriate diet because you do get everything you need in the proportion that you need it, as evidenced by the fact that the Inuit exist. They're living in the Arctic Circle. There's nothing else for them to eat except meat, and they're thriving in very harsh conditions. You do not thrive during those, or you don't even survive in those conditions unless you are peak physical health. And we not only thrive during the ice ages in the Arctic Circle, we became the most dominant species that has ever existed. What were people eating when they crossed the land bridge from Asia to North America during an ice age in the Arctic Circle, 1,500 miles north of Seattle, that at the time was under a mile high block of ice? Like, I'm sorry, like they were not getting quinoa and like and roots root vegetables. So you get everything you need from meat.
Amazing. Okay,
Fatty
so
meat. It has to be fatty though. The fat is
fatty
part of it.
meat.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that makes a lot of sense. It's so funny. I've recently gotten way more into fatty meat after my
Mm,
entire life being told to cut every ounce of
mm,
fat. I was roasting
yeah.
my poor mom and my grandma. I love them, but they're both like they trim every piece of fat off meat.
Mm,
So I grew up thinking that's what you have to do, and that fat's gross and it makes you fat.
mhm,
And then a few years ago, I was like, wait, no, fat's flavor. I feel so much better with it. I feel
mm,
smarter with it, and I'm losing weight. So none of this makes
mhm.
sense.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
when it comes to eating meat, because I know we're going to be dealing with a lot of different budgets here or different availability, is grain-fed beef better than no beef at all?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. And you should just eat the meat that you enjoy, that tastes good, that makes you feel the best, and that you can afford and have access to.
Mhm.
You don't have to break the bank and just get the artisan raised grass-fed bison on pasture getting massages by a shaman, I mean, like, you don't need all that. It's nice, but all meat is healthy. All meat is beneficial, and unless they're really exposed to something harmful. Um, and every plant causes harm, every single one, to varying degrees. I mean, well, avocados and grapes, those are fruit, and the plant wants you to eat fruit. Then why do they kill cats and dogs? Right? Because there's
Mm-hmm.
toxins in them, right? There are lectins, tannins, oxalates, all these other sorts of things in there. So all meat is good for you. Every plant is bad for you, and so any meat trumps any plant. So yeah, if you can only afford, chicken and grain finished ground beef, that is really healthy stuff. And I eat a lot of grain finished meat because that's what I have access to in a lot of places. And like I bought a grass-fed and finished cow at one point. It's like a lot cheaper if you can buy the whole cow. Amazing, tasted amazing. I felt amazing, but you don't always have access to that. And so, I check people's blood work. I look at their nutrients. I look at their hormones, and you can be extremely healthy eating grain finished stuff. Some people may need, they have MTHFR, or they may have a malabsorption issue. For those people, grass fed and finished pasture raised, arguably do have, objectively have 4 to 5 times the number of micronutrients. Okay. So that's good. They may have little better omega-3 to omega-6 ratio and the right kinds of omega-3s and omega-6s because the plant-based versions are not the ones we need. But so my patients that will just stick to only grass-fed and finished, like their nutrients and hormones, they're just perfect all the time. Grain finished may be perfect or maybe just a bit lower. Again, if they have a higher nutrient demand like MTHFR, they might need more B12 or something like that. But you add in a bit of liver, and that sorts out everything. A bit of liver organs; those are so nutrient dense and amazing that that will fill up any gap. So, you do not have to break the bank. In fact, it's typically cheaper to eat this way because you're not getting the espressos, you're not getting the bags of chips, you're not getting the snacks. You eat 2 pounds of fatty meat in a day, and you're good for 24 hours. And I'm sorry, but even a pound of steak costs less than a pound of spinach and broccoli. Like, it's just not even the same comparison. And you get perfect nutrition from the meat, and you get completely inadequate nutrition from the plants.
Yeah, not only are you not getting nutrition, but it's stealing your nutrients and stealing your minerals. So it's like
Absolutely.
negative, which is so
Yeah, it
crazy.
is.
Okay, so
Yeah.
I hear this all the time, and I have to ask you, I'm sorry if this is invasive, but
Mhm, mhm.
are carnivores constipated?
No. Well, I mean,
So
think about
why
it.
not?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. So, I mean, 70% of animal species are carnivores, okay? They just
Yeah.
all no none of them can defecate. I mean, I've yet to see a nature video of, like, lions just struggling. I mean, that would be, like, a major, like, thing, wouldn't
Yeah.
it? If that was, like, it's just a common feature. Fiber does not actually help constipation. We've had, controlled trials in humans actually showing, experimental data that can actually show a cause and effect relationship that actually showed that more fiber actually worsens constipations and the symptoms of IBS, and that as you decrease the amount of fiber, it actually improves these symptoms. And the group, there are 4 groups. One at increased fiber, one same fiber, decreased fiber, and then no fiber. The no fiber group completely eliminated all symptoms and constipation. So fiber is actually a problem. It's a bulking agent. It causes more of a blockage, right? Because if you're sort of backed up, the last thing you want to do is add more bulk to that. So, no, you want bulk. So the peristalsis, that was completely made up. They started saying that we should eat more fiber like in the 80s. I was a kid. I remember when they said this. And because everyone was getting constipated because that's when they remove the fat. The fat is what keeps your stool soft. You have a limited capacity to absorb fat based on a bile. When you run out of bile, fat just goes out. You can only absorb a very small amount of fat after that, usually like MCTs, and the rest of it just goes out. So it's that excess fat that actually keeps things soft. And so if you're getting constipated, hard, dry stools, then by definition you're not eating enough fat. And when we all took all the fat out of our diet in the 80s, everyone started getting constipated. I remember it on the news, people talking about constipation. This is like a new thing. And the doctors recommend fiber, and that increases the peristalsis. But why didn't we need fiber for peristalsis before the 1980s? Why is that? It's we were saying biological creatures. I mean, this is in the span of one person's lifetime. It's not even that like, oh, kids now are seeing this. No, it's just like you as an adult were never constipated. Now you're always constipated. Why is that? Oh, because you need more fiber. Well, I wasn't eating fiber before, so it's not like I took it out. Well,
Mhm.
you took the fat out. And so you actually can get much more. Or I mean, think about it this way. If you have like a log jam in a river, right? How do you get that unstuck? Do you send a shit ton more of logs in there to like smash it,
No.
just sort of force it through? No, that's going to make the log jam worse. It's going to back that up and make it even more stuck and hard to undo, right? And that's what you're doing when you're throwing fiber into your colon. It just makes things worse. People mistake frequency for consistency. The definition of constipation is the texture, the consistency based on like things like the Bristol stool chart. And so it's like hard, dry, rocky pellet sort of things or whatever. That's very constipated. Then it gets sort of softer and softer, and it can be loose stool. So there's something called the Bristol stool chart. People can look that up. That's constipation. If you just go once a week or once a month or once a year, that's not necessarily because of constipation. You absorb 98 to 99% of the meat that you eat. If you cut out the gristle, you will absorb nearly 100% of that. And because this is our biologically appropriate diet, so we can perfectly break it down and absorb it. And that also shows with plants, well, we can't break down and absorb about 95% of the plant, so that all has to come out. A lot of that's the fiber. And so if you can't break it down, you can't absorb it. Obviously, it's probably not something that we need in our life, is it? And certainly not in our gut. And so when you're eating meat, you're absorbing nearly 100% of the meat that you're eating. And so you can eat 2, 3 pounds of meat a day. Sometimes people eat more than that, and they have to go to the bathroom once a week, and it's a very small amount, but it's soft because it has that fat. And so that's the difference. And people freak out. They're like, I haven't gone. I normally go like 6 times a day, and I haven't gone in 3 days. Oh, obviously, I'm all blocked up. No, you're not. It's just that you're absorbing your food now, because you're actually eating real food as opposed to, sawdust, which is what fiber is. And they actually add sawdust into processed foods to raise their fiber because fiber is termed an essential nutrient now, meaning that you can get paid more and sell more product if you have higher fiber content. So, what is fiber? Fiber is cellulose. What is sawdust? Sawdust is cellulose. And so they take sawdust and put it into food. And I'm sorry, we're not termites. And that is not something that we actually need as an essential nutrient. We don't even get nutrition from cellulose. We don't make cellulase, so we can't break it down. We get no nutrition from it. We get no calories, no vitamins, no minerals. So how can something that's not even a nutrient be an essential one? It doesn't make any sense.
Wow. Okay, this goes against everything that I've been
Mm-hmm.
told my entire life. And it makes sense. Like, it makes sense, but I was born in the 90s. I grew up in peak Fiber One
Mm-hmm.
era, like Fiber One bars. That's
Yeah.
what everyone ate growing up. And I'm like, this goes against so many paradigms. And it's
Mhm.
mind blowing, but it does make sense. I mean, we're eliminating the waste. So if you're absorbing all the nutrients, what else is there left? Like, that
Mhm.
is that is crazy. I'm sure it'll, ruffle a few
Yeah.
feathers, but like I said, guys,
Mhm.
have an open mind and it never hurts to test something
Mhm.
out. Okay, so and
I
then for some
I
oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say one real quick thing because the other
Yeah.
argument is that, well, no, actually, you don't need it for you need it for your microbiome.
Mm,
Wrong, because the argument is that, well, the microbiome does make cellulase and it breaks that down and releases short chain fatty acids, which are 100% saturated. This is actually where cows and gorillas and actual herbivores get their nutrition because they actually are farming their bacteria, and the bacteria eat the cellulose, and as a byproduct, they produce saturated fat, and that's what the cow and the gorilla absorbs. And then the bacteria die off, and they absorb that as like protein and nutrients. There's a lot of very high protein. Bacteria is very high protein, and so they absorb that and get protein and fat. So they're not actually absorbing carbs. They're not absorbing that glucose from that. So some of those bacteria may be in our gut, and they can make a bit of those short chain fatty acids. And people say, well, your enterocytes, they really need that. I'm like, well, there's plenty of people that don't eat any fiber at all, and their intestines aren't just dying, so they can actually run on a glucose if they're eating a highly processed food diet with no fiber, but also ketones, because those short chain fatty acids actually break down to butyrate, and hydroxybutyrate is the main ketone body that we make when we're in ketosis. Butter has butyrate. That's how where it gets its name, butter, from all the butyrate that's in it. And so you get more of this food for your intestine from actually just being in ketosis and eating animal fats that have high butyrate. So you feed it in, and from your bloodstream. You don't need to feed it from the inside out. Um, and and also people are arguing like, well, you need these ketones. Like, right, you need to be in ketosis. When you're in ketosis, your body runs on ketones. All your tissues predominantly run on ketones, even when there's glucose available. And so that's, again, another sign that we should be in this ketogenic state, and our guts are as well. But you get that just from your bloodstream from eating fatty meat, and especially being in ketosis. But it could run on glucose anyway. It's not like you die and your intestine fails if they're running on glucose. Just like your brain can run on glucose, but it prefers ketones, and because it will take ketones over glucose even when both are available. So that's an obvious preference. But then there's like, well, your microbiome, you need a healthy, diverse microbiome, and you need fiber for that. Again, that's assuming a fact that's not in evidence. People have said that and repeated that without any evidence either asked for or provided. The basis for that is they look at people that are on a processed food, standard American, standard Australian, standard Western garbage diet, and it doesn't have much fiber in it. And so then they say, okay, well, we'll put in some whole foods, we'll put in some fiber, we'll put in some this. And oh, look at that, their microbiome, it gets better and their health improves a bit. Oh, okay, great. That must mean that fiber is good for you. Well, no, maybe it's just getting rid of the damn processed food and junk, because they don't do that with the Maasai. They don't do that with the Inuit. They don't do that with the Nanette, who don't eat any fiber because they just eat meat or milk. And they actually have tested their microbiome. Their microbiome is extremely healthy and diverse. So you don't actually need fiber to get a healthy microbiome. In fact, I've known there's a number of people have done this, but one in particular is a guy named Ben Azadi, who's been doing keto sort of content for a long time. He decided to try carnivore recently, and health improved in a lot of ways. He's very clean keto, a lot of meat, but with salads and whole foods and things like that, whole plants. And and he did a microbiome test, and he said it was okay. It wasn't great, sort of middle of the range. And that's with eating a lot of fiber and all that sort of stuff. And the recommendation was, okay, to improve this, you need to cut out all meat, and especially red meat, because that's really bad for your microbiome. Red meat doesn't even get to your microbiome. Red meat gets dissolved and absorbed in your small intestine before it ever reaches your colon. So that's nonsense. But and eat a lot more fiber. And he said that he did the exact opposite, and he's made videos on this. He did the exact opposite, where he only ate red meat and he didn't eat any fiber. And 3 months later, he did a microbiome test, and it was perfect. And in fact, he had more of these different microbes and things like that that weren't there before. It's like, so where do those come from? Right? I think it comes from your oral biome, because your oral biome actually changes when with the different things you eat. The bacteria that cause cavities, and the reason we need to brush our teeth and disinfect it every day, like no animal on earth has to do, is because we're eating the wrong food and we're getting the wrong bacteria, and that's rotting our teeth. If your teeth rot in the wild, you die because you can't eat, you can't defend yourself. And so um, when you eat just meat, and those enamel eating bacteria eat carbs, they eat sugars, they eat fiber, those sorts of things. And so that's what you breed when you eat that stuff. And but then when you're eating normal things, you're going to change your oral biome, and then that bacteria is going to get into the food, and that can carry down and get into your intestine. So that's where I think is coming from. But yeah, you definitely don't need fiber from the microbiome thing. They always try to pivot and say, oh, you need fiber, and this is bad, and fat's bad, and cholesterol is bad. Okay, well, cholesterol, actually, there's different kinds of cholesterol. Okay, well, LDL is bad. It's 100 different kinds of LDL. Okay, SDLDL is bad. Okay, well, actually, okay, well, that ApoB is bad. Well, actually, there's, the lean mass hyperresponder study shows no association between, heart disease and ApoB. And it's like, and it's just like they just keep jumping to different points. And then with fiber, it's like, well, you have to have a peristalsis. Well, what about all the other carnivores? And what about the Inuit? Well, it's an essential nutrient because it helps reduce glucose. Well, what if you just don't eat glucose? And also, it's an anti-nutrient because it's actually blocking out the absorption of nutrients. That's why it's blocking out glucose. So it's actually stopping you and preventing you from absorbing nutrients. Like, well, you need it for your microbiome. And it's like that's the last place that they've jumped to, but
Mhm.
that's wrong too. I don't know where they're going to jump to next with the fiber argument, but that will be wrong too.
Yeah, I don't think they expect people to ask too many questions. So when
Mm,
you do start to
yeah.
like pull at the threads, it
Mhm,
causes issues. It causes issues for big food for sure. But that's important. Like
mhm.
we need to be picking at these threads and asking questions and not just blindly following the food pyramid plate guidelines. Like they're making people sick, like you said. Okay, so one thing I always love to ask the experts because I think it's so humanizing to hear what's going on for people who are just doing so well in their arenas. What is your current health goal?
Uh, well, I just wanna be as healthy as I can and just give my body exactly what it needs. My long-term health goal is, to live to 130, 140 just naturally, because genetically, we are designed to live to be 120. I learned that in genetics at UW, you know? So, if you based on the length of our telomeres, so telomeres are sort of the caps at the end of our chromosomes, and that can give you a sort of a rough gauge on how long you're gonna live and how metabolically, healthy you are. And so, based on the length of our telomeres, it's estimated that we should live 120 years on average, meaning that if you just stay out of your own way and don't mess up, you should make it to 120 without doing anything special. So why are we dying in our 60s and 70s? Why are we saying that 80 is good and that 90 is like, wow, that's really good? I've had people saying like, well, my grandma ate vegetables and she lived to 92. Like, yeah, she died 30 years early. And I'm sorry to hear that, And so we should be living decades longer. And if you die decades early, it's because you've been sick for decades as well, and your body's been breaking down and decomposing. You look at the Native Americans in the Great Plains eating bison, etc. This is documented in the work of Dr. J.H. Salisbury, who did a 30-year research project into optimal nutrition in the 1800s, and he found that by far and away, the best thing was just beef and water. And this could actually, and he was finding this was reversing autoimmune diseases and even helping people get over tuberculosis and things like that, curing gout. Back in the 1800s, he wrote a book on this called The Relation of Alimentation and Disease, the relationship between what we eat and the diseases that we get. And he makes the same argument that I'm making now, is that the food we're eating is making us sick. And details, documents the Native Americans, they were living to be 115, 120 or more as healthy, active adults. You look at animals in the wild; they don't just get more and more decrepit and get Alzheimer's and osteoporosis and arthritis, and they're all creaked and sarcopenic and things like that. And was like, well, but they get eaten when they start slowing down. Yeah, sure, but not in the zoo. Nothing's eating them in the zoo, and they're just sitting there. And you just have these animals that are healthy and they're ripped. They're like they're on steroids. They're sitting in a box. They get no exercise, right? They're just sitting there all day, but they're extremely healthy, and they just go and they're just healthy, active adults until one day they just sort of slow down. They're just sleeping a lot more, and they just go to sleep and just don't wake up. And that's normally how we live out our life. And so that's my health goal, is to sort of live to that point. I'm not into the whole biohacking, injecting this and doing that. People inject NAD. If
Mhm.
you want to increase your NAD, go on a ketogenic diet, because it costs 25% of the NAD to make the same amount of ATP from ketones as it does glucose. So ketones, to make 2-acetyl CoA to go into the ATP cycle from ketones, takes one NAD molecule. But to make those same 2-acetyl CoA molecules with glucose, it takes 4 NAD molecules. So you're gonna use up your NAD. You're gonna have a higher demand for NAD with a shorter supply if you're eating carbs and other sorts of things. So this is, the best thing you can do for biohacking, something to get you 40, 50 years of not only lifespan but health span. That's the low hanging fruit. You should change that. And then, again, I'm on a 130-year timeline. So, if something comes up and we have 30 years of evidence that this will really improve your longevity. Great, I'll start it then. Like, I got plenty of time to get going on this. But also, we have to ask ourselves: are these longevity pills and these injections and whatever, are they helping generally? And will they help on top of living optimally and eating optimally and getting another 50 years of life anyway? Or are they undoing and mitigating some of the damage that we're causing ourselves that make us live shorter lives? Okay, you're getting another 10 years if you take metformin or something like that. These animal models are starting to do things in human as well. So it's theorized. Okay, but that this would be longevity providing. But what does metformin do? It lowers glucose and lowers insulin. Yeah, if you have less blood sugar and lower insulin levels, I guarantee you're going to live longer. But you go on a ketogenic diet, carnivore diet, you're always going to have perfectly low blood sugar and insulin. Insulin's really important too because glucose just causes damage to your body. So it sort of goes up above the normal ranges. It starts damaging your body irreversibly. And insulin is raised to mitigate that. But insulin, it doesn't just drive energy into cells, it also does a whole bunch of other things. It affects hundreds of different processes in your body and your brain. And so when you elevate that with glucose, it's now elevated and out of balance for everything else and causes harm. So you lower that down to normal levels or more towards normal levels. Yeah, I have no doubt that you're going to improve things. Um, but if you just eat properly, that's not an issue. It's a moot point anyway. So that's what I would wonder. So that's my main goal is just to be healthy, raise a bunch of healthy kids, and have them be carnivores and grow and develop to their genetic potential, be a lot taller and smarter and have bigger brains than I have, and just be able to carry that on to their kids. And that's sort of my main goal. And my main goal is to try to get this to as many people as possible because it is our birthright to be healthy. All life on earth is inherently healthy. You only become unhealthy because something has happened to you, and by and large, and so people being sick and suffering all the time, it shouldn't happen. It's an unnecessary harm on the world, and it's an easy fix. So it's like it's unforced errors. It's just like
Mhm.
we could just be healthy all the time, and so at least getting the people the knowledge and information on how to be healthy, on how to live a healthy life without medication, without supplements, without the newest hack or whatever, just being healthy because you should be healthy. That's really important. And then people can do what they want. I mean, people know smoking's bad for them, drinking's bad for them. They do it anyway because they enjoy it. Great, go to town. You want a donut, even though you know that shit is toxic, fine. But don't avoid meat because you think meat is harmful and eat
Mhm.
this other garbage because you think it's healthful because it's actually the opposite.
Yeah, that's the worst when people truly are believing that they're taking care of their bodies because they're not given
Mhm.
proper information. And I'm so
Yeah.
excited to get this episode out there. I mean, this blew my mind. So I know it's going to blow so many minds and I'm feeling really inspired. I'm like ready to go to the store and
Yeah.
drop plants, which, I've been
Yeah.
on that kind of a journey of like cutting out really high oxalate, really high phytate plants, trying to minimize anti-nutrients. My poor husband, I was vegan for 5 years when we were dating when I was vegan. So I took him on that loop and then I took him off of it. And then I started like getting into like, oh, like anti-nutrients and kind of taking him through. And he told me before this episode, he's like, Delaney, do not force another new wave eating on me. And I was like, well, we'll see what happens. But
Yeah.
he might be, I think he'll actually like this though. I feel like he would
Yeah.
really thrive on carnivore.
Oh, good.
So I'm excited. I know that I've been definitely leaning that way, especially like reversing symptoms of my own hypothyroidism.
Yeah,
Going
good.
towards animal based has dramatically impacted the health of my thyroid and like changed my life. So I can't wait for other people
Good.
to discover that. So where can people find you if they want to learn more, connect with you, and just start this journey?
Well, first of all, I'm really glad to hear this has really helped you. I love hearing those stories. That's sort of why I keep doing this, just because like people say it's like, oh, you should keep putting this out. I'm like, I can't stop. I just see it
Yeah.
help too many people. I see these amazing stories like that all the time. So that's really good to hear. I have a YouTube channel. It's just my name, Anthony Chaffee, MD, and that's the same as my Instagram channel. Um, and that's where I find most of my things. I'm on, Facebook and other things, and Twitter, X, whatever. Twitter's Anthony underscore Chafee. But you can sort of find all that. The main ones, I put my podcast out and I put my videos out on YouTube. And so I have a lot of things where people can get started on. There's actually a playlist called Getting Started on a Carnivore Diet if people want to check that out, if they want to get some inspiration for that. And then my podcast is, the audio versions of that. And that's just called the Plant Free MD. Sort of makes sense with my sort of theories on things.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Anthony Chafee. I learned so much. We really jammed a lot into the past hour or so. So I'm really excited for everyone to listen to this. And if you guys love this episode, make sure that you share it, tag Dr. Anthony Chafee, tag myself, help us get this word out there and spread this message to shift some paradigms when it comes to big food and diet culture and really just getting the proper information out there. Dr. Anthony, thank you so much for joining me today.
Very welcome. Thank you for having me.